Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. So today I thought I would do kind of a really quick, really cute short video about the planetary hours, and that was 4 days ago when I started. Since then, in that time, I have had to go through kind of a slew of research trying to find the answers to what I thought were going to be very simple, easy questions, but it turns out that's not the case. I had to read through some, 100-long page PDFs to read snippets of magazines where people are writing to one another. I had to call in help. So there was a lot more moving pieces to this than I initially thought, and that's fine. We got to some really interesting information that I'm really excited to share, but still waiting on some of the answers to those questions that I thought were going to be very simple, yes or no. So planetary hours, what are they? Why do we have them? What do we use them for? The planetary hour system is a way to qualify seasonal hours. So we're used to kind of civil hours and kind of our civil timekeeping, which breaks the day up into 24 equal hours of 60 minutes each. That's not how planetary hours work, and that's not how seasonal hours work. To determine seasonal hours, you take the length of time between sunrise and sunset and divide that by 12, and then you'll do the same thing for the length of time between sunset and sunrise. This gives you 12 equal hours of daylight and 12 equal hours of nighttime. These are not going to be the same to one another. That's where we get into the not 60 minutes each. And they're not going to be the same year-round. So in times of the year like the summer, when there is more daylight, when daylight is longer, the daytime hours will be longer than the nighttime hours, and the inverse will be true in winter, where it's longer nighttime hours and shorter daylight hours. The seasonal hours are a very common method of timekeeping kind of around the world, but especially in cultures that directly influence the kind of foundational or beginning versions of astrology. We see it in Greece, we see it in Babylon, we see it in Egypt. In Babylon, these seasonal hours were called the semanu, and that was a unit of time that was utilized, but it seems that what was more significant were the double hours, kind of the combinations of two subsequent planetary hours in the Beru. And this is something that we see referenced a lot within like Babylonian timekeeping and even Babylonian mythology. Famously, one of the stories that we have is Gilgamesh racing the sun. And we are given kind of updates on the progress of this race every Beru. We kind of check in on them and see kind of where they're at. I like to joke that that's the mythic origin of Placidus houses, as each cusp in a Placidus house chart is going to show where the position of the sun will be every Beru, every two seasonal hours. From here, it's kind of easy to see how planetary hours evolved. Kind of the basic idea that each hour will be qualified slightly differently, have slightly different or unique characteristics to the one that came before or the one that came after. I think we have a pretty interesting example of this in the Greek magical papyri, where there's a prayer to Helios that traces his forms as he moves throughout the 12 daylight hours in a way that I think mimics very similarly a prayer to Selene, where we see her forms listed out as she moves throughout her phases each day in her synodic cycle. So with that in mind, just kind of seeing this easy sort of transfer of the seasonal hours and kind of different qualities that they might have to one another, it's really easy to see how we might go from that to planets kind of turning over rulership to one another as each hour moves on. But that kind of begs the question of when did this get started, right? So what was the earliest instance of planetary hours being utilized or used at all, either in timekeeping or in astrology? And this was my first big question that I had a really hard time getting a solid answer for, and I'm sorry to report that I still don't really have one. The earliest use of planetary hours that I can find was in 2nd century astrologer Vettius Valens' Anthology. In book 1, he talks about the planetary hours and gives us a method of how we can determine which planet rules the hour that somebody is born on. Valens doesn't talk about this system as if he is introducing it to us, or like it's new or novel, or he's trying to defend or explain it. So it doesn't seem likely that he invented it, and it likely came from an earlier source. He doesn't give us that source. He doesn't cite anything specifically. And that might be that by the time Vettius Valens was born, the system was so ubiquitous in common usage that he didn't feel like there needed to be an example given of like where it came from. It was just ever kind of omnipresent already. And that makes a lot of sense, knowing that our first instances of the days of the week having names named after the planets comes from 79 AD, which is about 40 years before Vettius Valens was born. That the days of the week already had planet names is a big indication that planetary hours were already in usage, because that is the naming convention for why the days have planetary names. The planet that rules the first hour of the day of each day is said to be the planet that then rules that entire day, and that's why they're named after the planets that way. The first hour of Saturday is ruled by Saturn, and that's why Saturday is Saturn's day. The sun rules the first hour of Sunday, and it's why Sunday is the sun's day. The moon rules the first hour of Monday, and that's why Monday is the moon's day. And then that kind of goes on through the rest of the days, which is a little bit better sort of reflected in different languages, whereas in English we have a Germanic influence which kind of mixes in Nordic gods and kind of makes the correlation is there, but it's harder to see linguistically than some other languages. So this brings us to the second question that I had a really hard time finding any information for. And this is where I'm really excited to start talking about. When did we start giving the days of the week individual identities and names? When did that happen? To answer that question, you have to go back in time a little bit to get a sense of how people kept time. Somehow I feel like every conversation I have lately devolves into like a discussion of some ancient calendar system and how it shaped our world and our conceptions of like time and space for like 5,000 years, and nobody knows why. Our first evidence of a 7-day week comes from Babylonian calendars. The Babylonian civil calendar was in use from around 1780 BCE, but was predicated on an earlier Sumerian calendar. This calendar consisted of 12 months that began with a new crescent moon was first sighted on the western horizon at sunset. The civil calendar was purely observation-based, and what that means is that there wasn't really an attempt to kind of predict when the months would be. It was just, there's the new moon, we're now in a new month. And this resulted in months that kind of alternated between either 29 or 30 days. This causes a lot of issues, especially when we're kind of planning things out in the future. So what was adopted was the administrative calendar, which is a calendar also of 12 months, but these months all have fixed 30 days in them. It doesn't matter what the moon's doing, like this is just how we're doing it. Astronomers and other like civil leaders would use primarily the administrative calendar for predictive work or for talking about time and for recording celestial observations. And this resulted in some kind of interesting moon lore, where we have lucky and unlucky months that are determined by whether or not the moon appears at the right time as when she should, according to the administrative calendar, which is also kind of echoed in Greek months, where we have months that are a full 30 days, and those are lucky, and then we have hollow months, which are made of 29 days, and are considered unlucky. So I think that's just kind of an interesting aside, not super related. But what ends up happening is once you base your month off of the moon, you start to notice that around every 7 days, you have a nice kind of visible change of the moon. From that new moon, 7 days later that half moon, 7 days later that full moon, 7 days later that other half moon, back to the moon being invisible. And this is kind of how the civil calendar was organized, where you would have 3 weeks of 7 days, followed by a 4th week of 8 or 9 days, depending on kind of what the moon was doing, how much time it took for the moon to reappear. So in many cases, these months were sort of dictated their length afterwards, right? And this is kind of the problem with the predicting of using the civil calendar for predictions or long-term planning, and why we use the administrative calendar for it. So the moon's synodic cycle, her period from new moon to new moon, or from first crescent to first crescent, is about 29.5 days, which results in about 7.3 days if we're going to quarter it. And it's interesting that the 7-day week didn't get codified much more strongly or much earlier, and I think it might have something to do with 7 not really being a number that can go into 60 very well, and sort of like Babylon's, we're going to say, fascination with that number. At this time, there does not seem to be evidence enough to suggest that each of the days, each day in this kind of 7-day cycle was given its own identity. This is something that seems to be reserved for the 7th or final day in the cycle, which was considered a holy day, where there was a list of things that were forbidden to do because it was unlucky. Instead, each final day, each 7th day in the cycle was used for ritual practices, each one associated with a different pair of gods. Some of these gods are planetary, but not all of these gods are planetary, which is an interesting thing and brings us to the question of, did the Babylonians actually name the days of the week after the planets? And this was the other question that I kept trying to find a real answer for, but was not and still have not been able to. So if anybody knows, please let me know. And I know what you're going to tell me. Ryan, just Google it. Like, just go and look, and you can see dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of web pages telling you that the origins of the planetary days of the week is Babylon. Like, Babylon named the 7 days after their planetary gods, and the Greeks just copied it. Like, that should be known. And I agree, there's a bunch of websites out there that say that, but what I could not find was a website that said where it came from. I was not able to find a website that said, according to the Mullah pin, where you can see the days of the week listed. I wasn't able to find it. And that's a big problem, partly because I feel like I'm being royal starred on it, in that it is sort of a astrological myth that we just kind of take for granted and keep repeating. And it's something that, like, I get very sensitive to the fact when I'm hearing a piece of information repeated to me, but nobody's telling me where they heard it from. So this isn't something I've been able to find out for sure whether or not it's something that Babylonians did. And the reason why it's important to determine whether or not they named their days of the week after the planetary gods is because there's a follow-up question to that. Did the Babylonians name their days in the same order as we do now? So what I mean is, our current order of the days is Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. Did the Babylonians also name them in that order? Did they do Sun God Day, Moon God Day, Mars God Day, Mercury God Day, Jupiter God Day, etc.? Did they do that? I haven't been able to find a good answer to that. What I have seen is references to a Babylonian ordering of the planets that goes Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, Saturn, Mars. And that's neat and all, but that's not super helpful. It doesn't include the sun and the moon, and it's not right with our order either. But it might be ordering it in some other way that I just don't know what it means. But ultimately, why it's important if the Babylonians ordered their days of the week the same that we did, is that if they did do sun, moon, Mars, etc., then it means that either the planetary hours were invented as a system to explain why the Babylonians named the days that way, or that the Babylonians were using planetary hours already, and we don't know that. But if they didn't name the days of the week after in the same order, then it means that they were rearranged to fit the planetary hours. Or if the Babylonians didn't name the days of the week after the planets at all, then it means that the planetary hours were solely responsible, like that system is solely responsible for informing the names of the days of the week. So that's where we're at. That's the question mark. That was when this whole, we'll just do a cute video about planetary hours, just rapidly devolved into what the hell is going on? What have I been lied to this entire time? But those are some questions that I don't have the answers to. I think they make some really interesting things to think about, and I would love if there's some more information out there to more concretely answer this question, because that would just be huge, and I would love for it to be explained more properly. I would love nothing else than to find out that everybody was right, that the Babylonians did name the days of the week after the planets and everything is right with the world. But I just get really suspicious when I keep hearing that somebody did something, but I don't see the source for that happening. Then we come to another big question. When do the planetary days begin? Do they begin at sunrise, or do they begin at sunset? And this is a little bit more of a complicated question than I thought it was going to be, because what we end up having now is this kind of resurgence in this usage of what's called planetary nights. So the idea as it's being used contemporarily is that the planet that rules the first hour after sunrise rules the daytime half, and then the planet that rules the first hour after sunset rules the nighttime half. So you have these kind of splits where you have, like, Sunday, the day is ruled by the sun, and the night is ruled by Mercury, kind of a thing. And I don't like it, is what I'm going to say. I don't like it. But that's okay. I wanted to find out more about it. I wanted to find out where it came from. I was able to find a reference to it in Bonatti, who says something very similarly in his considerations, I think, his 146 considerations. But I haven't been able to find much about it beyond that. The question of where the planetary days begin, whether it's sunrise or it's sunset, comes because different cultures around the world start their days at different times. So, as we saw with the Babylonian calendar, it started with the first crescent moon visible after sunset. And that makes it very easy to sort of naturally go from, so the month begins when the moon is visible after sunset, so every day begins at sunset as well. It's a very natural kind of system there. The Jewish calendar picks up on that and also runs with it, and the adoption of the 7-day week from the time of when the Jews were under Babylonian occupation, that then goes and kind of spreads its own wings in the Jewish community and Jewish cultures to inform their 7-day week, where the days aren't given like planetary names, but they're just numbered, and then the creation myth in Genesis is sort of structured after this 7-day period from the Babylonian civil calendar that the Jews were under and used for a long time. The Islamic calendar also begins with days at sunset. What's another one? Christian liturgical calendars start with days on sunset. That's why you have Christmas Eve and like All Hallows Eve. And so we have a group of things that start at sunset. We have a group of things that start at midnight. Chinese days started at midnight, and as did Roman civil days. And then we have some cultures whose days started at sunrise, like the Egyptians are the big one there. So we have a nice kind of distribution of cultures starting their days at different solar times: sunset, midnight, or sunrise. So where do planetary hours come? Where do planetary days? Where do planetary hours come in this? Do they start at night? Do they start in the day? Who knows? So I don't like the idea of planetary nights as being kind of their own distinct things. And I was very curious to see where in the Wikipedia page about planetary hours it says that Vettius Valens says that planetary hours start at night. I said, that's interesting. Weird. So I went and I tried to find this section of Valens talking about this.
It seems very clear to me that he says it's happening on a Wednesday, Mercury's day, but during the first hour of night, which belongs to the sun. He then goes on to list the planetary hours for both day and night, and they line up with just being regular Wednesday hours. Valens even concludes by saying the next day will be again on a Jupiter's hour. So that Valens starts the planetary days at night is not my takeaway from this section of the text, and I'm not sure where it got started. I was able to find a paper about it by Robert Odom, which argues that this section indicates Valens begins his planetary days at sunset. He provides the Greek text in his own translation, but the newer translation of the text by David Riley disagrees. Even as recent as the 2022 re-release with commentary, the text reads as if it's Mercury's day, with the day starting at sunrise on that planetary hour.
That Wikipedia article also goes on to describe Vettius Valens saying that, kind of like I talked about earlier, that the daylight hours are ruled separately from the nighttime hours. They're both ruled by the planet that rules the first hour of each half. But I wasn't able to find a section where he said that. There's no source linked there's no citation given in the Wikipedia article. So if you know what that's talking about, please let me know. I'd love to read more what they're talking about to see what he's saying. And the Wikipedia page goes on to describe a graffiti from Pompeii that says a specific date is a Sunday when we would see it in the calendar as a Wednesday. And that's kind of curious because the first hour of night on a Wednesday is ruled by the sun. So that's kind of curious. That's something interesting to look at. But if you go look to the paper that links to, the author who's talking about it and reporting on the graffiti points out some other date errors, such as them saying it's the 15th day of the lunar month when it would have been the 16th, and that the market days were off. So maybe this person just didn't know what day it was. It's hard to say. So there is a little bit of controversy here about when planetary days begin and whether or not they should be halved to where the daytime gets its own ruler separate from the nighttime. I don't really like this division. I think it's a really interesting way to sort of pay homage to cultures who begin their days at sunset. I think that's really interesting. But I would push back on this and say that the planetary hour system was developed for a sunrise-only system. So what I mean by this is all of these cultures that began their days on the sunset, they didn't use a system of 7 days where each day was sort of uniquely identified with a planet. They either didn't have distinct week periods, or they didn't have unique names, or they were just numbered. There wasn't really a planetary connection to them. So I'm not sure that the homage really pays off, since there's not a strong link between the two. But there is a very strong link, a very obvious link between planetary hours starting at sunrise, because that's where the name of the day comes from. So hopefully by now you're kind of starting to understand why the planetary hours and the planetary days were not as quick, simple, and fun of a topic as I thought they were going to be, or as I hoped they were going to be. There's a lot of questions there that are still kind of worth sussing out and thinking about. But now we can move away from history and development into usage, where we can have a bit more fun with. So why do we have planetary hours? What are they used for? Kind of like I said at the top of this, they're just a way of qualifying hours. So if we're very used to the idea of Time Lords in astrology, the idea that a planet rules or has a certain amount of authority or involvement in a particular period of time in somebody's life. We think about it probably a lot through the context of annual perfections, where certain planets or signs turn on as we advance throughout life. And Vettius Valens goes on to describe a whole system of the planet that rules the year, the planet that rules the month, and then of course the planet that rules the day, and the planet that rules the hour. So if we see time not as indistinct blank slates, but as environments where certain powers are more active than other powers or more active at other times, then we start to see the use of planetary hours as a system of electional astrology, as like a basic system of electional astrology, in a way that's not too dissimilar, I think, from the lunar mansions. If you don't have, the ability to devise up a whole full astrological chart to, figure out when to go buy something, well, at least you can probably figure out when the hour of Jupiter is to go buy something, right? So that's where we see the planetary hours come out a lot, most often as a sort of folk version of electional astrology, very similar to like the days of the moon, or anything like that, like a series of lucky and unlucky days or hours informed by planetary hours. We see it a little bit in natal astrology. There's like a whole kind of folk rhyme about how being born on particular days of the week can affect a child, and we see the planetary hour being used in Ibn Ezra's Al-Mute of the Figure calculations. We also see it a little bit in horary, where we start to see ideas of radicality, of whether or not a horary chart can be accessed, or kind of how useful it is to access that horary chart. The idea being that there needs to be certain connections between the chart as it's cast and the planet that rules the hour. Kind of this idea that it's the right celestial time to do something, which I think kind of slides very well into what I think a more common usage of the planetary hours is, and that's in, of course, astrological magic. The planetary hours are probably the most common criteria referenced in the Picatrix when it comes to making different talismans. So I use planetary hours a lot. I think about planetary hours a lot because I often structure a lot of my magical or ritual practices around them, and especially when it comes to like the creating planetary talismans. The idea is that you want the sort of celestial time, the planets, to match the terrestrial time, which would be indicated by the system of days and hours. So you would want to be able to make a Jupiter talisman when it's Jupiter's day and or Jupiter's hour. You kind of want that similitude to match and enhance the powers of the talisman that you're going to have. So we see it a lot there, and that tends to be more where it's utilized. It's more where I look at it from, making sure that we're making Mars talismans during Mars days and Mars hours, and it's something that I think is really, really, really important when it comes to talisman making. I know not everybody agrees, and you'll find a lot of instances of talismans that have been created when it's not that planet's day or hour. Sometimes I think that's fine, just kind of based on like, well, if you need it, you need it. You know what I mean? But it's not something that I would. It's not something that I would skip if I had the choice. I do think it is especially important to do. So unfortunately, as with any system, planetary hours, you're going to have alternates or misunderstandings and what I'm going to call extrapolations. The planetary hours, as I said, are a division of time from sunrise to sunset and sunset to sunrise to get equal hours of daylight and then equal hours of nighttime. These are then attributed to a planet within the Chaldean order. But the most common, the most famous, I think, alternative version of the planetary hours comes actually from the Keys of Solomon, the grimoire tradition, where we see in the text the planetary hours are assigned in the correct order, but starting at midnight on the day and not sunrise. That's not how it works. It's just not how it works. So there's not really anything else to say, whether that is just sort of like a scribal error or not really understanding, and kind of the shift towards, I don't know what happened there. Who can say? There are, of course, other planetary hour systems that are also associated with various kind of occult traditions. They're kind of minor, not really worth getting into. But one thing that I did want to kind of talk about is kind of finally, there are some contemporary astrologers who have succumbed completely to the madness and decided also to have a system of planetary minutes where you take the amount of time in a planetary hour, divide it by 60 to get a kind of cascading planetary minutes that are, just extra. It's just extra, that's all I'm going to say. I think it's kind of fun, and I think it makes a lot of logical sense to kind of keep going with it, to be like, oh, well, if we can divide, planetary years into planetary months, and planetary months into planetary days, and planetary days into planetary hours, then obviously we can do minutes, right? And I said, yeah, I guess you could, but I'm not sure. I don't need that extra level of fine-tuning, but if that's something that you enjoy, I'm not going to take it away from you. Just please keep it over there. But that's all that I had to share with you all today. What was supposed to be a very fun and quick video about planetary hours devolved into this whole origin of how we keep time, research madness to try to figure out where these came from and how they first got kind of introduced to us. Regardless of how they came to us, I think it's very clear that they serve a very important purpose, especially within kind of electional astrology and in astrological magic, where having that connection with a moment in time carved out and ruled by of the quality of the planet that we're trying to work with really helps to strengthen that connection into something that we wouldn't have had anything near to if that piece was missing. I also really like the planetary hours just because it makes us think about time in its own kind of unique sections, its own unique segments, where it can help with like scheduling or just helping us kind of appreciate that time is different, that each moment is different from the next. Even though that's something that we don't really get to experience a lot in our day-to-day lives, when there's really no difference between like 3:05 and 3:06. But in astrology, there might be. That might be when the hour switches, and now it's time to do something fun. But everybody take care, and I will see you all again very soon for our Libra solar eclipse elections.